everybody. My name is Kristina Dooley, and I am the founder of Estrela Consulting. And I'm super excited to be here with all of you today, and even more excited about our guest that is joining us. Melissa Hoppert is here with us tonight. And fun fact is that Melissa and I actually grew up in the same town together. We're friends in high school. It's been ages and ages since we've seen each other in person, have kept up in touch via social media. And I just think she has probably one of the coolest jobs ever. And so I was excited as we begin our new webinar series, which is called Star Paths, which is essentially digging in deeper to specific college majors and actually careers. And how do people get there? I think what people assume is often not the way that things happen. And so I thought it would be interesting for us to explore some areas that we have interest in from our current students, future students. And I know we have some school counselors and independent counselors out there who have curiosity about these topics. So feel free to share the recording of this with anyone who you think might find it helpful. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our special guest tonight, Melissa Hoppert. And Melissa's going to introduce herself and share just a little bit about her background. And you can also share, Melissa, why we were logging in just like right on the dot at this in that moment, because I think this is so indicative of your work. So I'll let you go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Hoppert. As Kristina said, we were cheerleaders together in high school. And we have a lot of Panther pride. And so essentially, I work at the New York Times. I've worked here for 16 years, and I started in the sports department as a copy editor. And then I worked my way up into what we call a backfield position, which is essentially like more story ideation. So working with the reporters, running a team of reporters, and kind of launching the story, and then it goes to the copy desk. And then from there, I've done various jobs, which I'm sure we'll get to, but I'm currently the deputy editor of the live team. And the reason that I was late, well, almost late, was because we had late breaking news that there might be a debt limit deal by Congress, and we thought we might have to go live for that, but it turns out they're just closing in on it. So you can read about this in the New York Times. The story should be going up momentarily. There's a newsroom behind me that is crashing on getting that story on the web, but there is no deal so far. It's just close. So no lie.
I feel like, well, thank you for spending the time with us. I would have been okay if I would have gotten a message from you. I know that your role really does take precedence over our Estrela webinars, but I'm thrilled that you're here. I would love for you to share with us, Melissa, just a little bit about your journey. The audience here, we've got families of high school students, students themselves, high school counselors working with kids through the college process, as well as some independent counselors like myself. And I'd love for you to share with us, first of all, how you ended up where you ended up in terms of college. And did you know what you were going to major in? Maybe give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a really kind of unconventional path, and I actually love that. But basically, I went to Ohio State. I did not know I wanted to major in journalism, but I had my best friend's mom used to find our notes that were planted all over her room. And she always used to say to me that you have a gift for writing. So when time came for college, I did feel some pressure to kind of figure out a major right away. And personally, I think that's actually kind of a mistake, because there was so many things that I learned while I was in college that it was like the whole world opened up to me. And so I kind of wished I had like waited a little bit. And I was literally teetering between nursing and public relations. And I went with public relations because of the writing thing, that I was like, okay, maybe Mrs. Doman has a plan for me. And as part of being a public relations major, I had to do a session, like a couple semesters with the school newspaper. It was required as part of the coursework. And then that's when my career really took off. That's when I knew I wanted to be in journalism. So I ditched PR right away. And I just became like a full-on journalism major. And once I got in that newsroom, just like the adrenaline of the news and the newsroom and just working as a team to like get the newspaper out was just so cool. And I was actually in school for the Bush v. Gore decision. And we had to, make a call that night about who won the presidential election.
Wow.
And we actually beat the Columbus Dispatch because we just went with a huge headline that said undecided. And the Dispatch went with Bush wins. And so it was like, it was not great. Yeah. So, and then of course, all the legal battles ensued and all of everything. So we ended up erring on the side of caution, and we actually, I think, came out ahead. So just being a part of that newsroom that night was so incredible. And then I eventually became the sports editor. And that was really special because, being at a big school like Ohio State was such a huge athletic program. There wasn't that many women who had been sports editors before. And so like, that's something that was really special in my career and kind of launched me into sports journalism. And that's kind of where I went from there. But, it wasn't a traditional path, and it wasn't like, I didn't know, I didn't grow up wanting to be a journalist.
I think that's really good for people to hear. I mean, I think for students to know, and a fun fact I'll mention, I don't have a story like Melissa's at all. I have a master's degree in journalism and public relations, and I'm clearly not working in the New York Times newsroom. So, however, for me, same thing. I had no intention of majoring in journalism. I loved writing though, and I definitely had professors. I love that you gave Mrs. Doman a shout out, by the way. I know Mrs. Doman. But I think having maybe that. Do you? I guess a question for you, Melissa, would be: do you feel like having a natural ability in writing is a necessity for a good print journalist? Do you think that's something that is needed?
Yes. I think it's a skill that applies to all sorts of work, not just in journalism. I hear from people all the time, oh, I wish I was a better writer, and they don't have anything to do with journalism. So it's a great skill to have no matter what. But of course, with journalism, you are working with words, writing words, editing words. And whether you're a reporter, an editor, you're working in the digital space, I think everybody has to have sort of a mastery of words. I always liked English. It was always like my favorite subject. And so I kind of knew like that was the path for me. And I look back on it and I was like, I was thinking nursing. Was I nuts? Like, I can't do math. So I think it just really worked out. But I also never grew up being like, oh, I have to be at the New York Times. So the fact that I'm at the New York Times and came from kind of somewhat a small town, a very blue collar town. It's like really amazing. It's just like not a traditional path. And so I'm like very proud of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and that's why I think I'm often in awe of people like you who grew up where we grew up, and seeing what they're doing today. And I think it's also pretty indicative of if you put in the work and you really, I think I'll just say that, put in the work and the effort to demonstrate that you have the abilities to move forward. I think that's so important that people don't get. I love that you went to Ohio State, and certainly I'd say Ohio State is a school, it's become pretty selective. I mean, and we have people watching from all parts of the country and the world, but we, certainly have some families probably from Ohio too. But I think it's important when we think about colleges and who launches from specific colleges, that it does not mean that you have to go to certain colleges to be sitting in the New York Times newsroom, for example. I think that's really important for people to know. I would love to hear, so you worked as a sports editor at Ohio State. What happened next? What was your next step from there?
My lights are shutting down.
That's all right. That's all right. I would
think
think the lights stay on like 24/7 at the New York Times, Melissa.
If I stand up and
That's
wave,
okay.
There's the newsroom if anybody's
Thank
interested.
you.
Hardly anybody in there because a lot of people are working from home and this late at night. I don't know why the lights went out. We're moving.
That's all right. That's
But
all right. We can
anyway,
see you.
sorry. So basically, after I graduated the Lantern, and I didn't have like crazy internships either. And a lot of the people that we're hiring out of school now for our fellowships have these crazy resumes where they have interned at the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times. And I never dreamed of even being at the New York Times, but like even interning at places like that. I interned for a weekly newspaper in Columbus. I was a intern for the Memorial Golf Tournament in their press office during college. I worked for the CBS affiliate. So I did like I amassed a lot of different skills, but I didn't, it wasn't like I was like a superstar writer at like intern at any of these major publications. But when I first graduated, I had a amazing advisor at the Ohio State Lantern who, and again, I should say that Ohio State is not a top journalism school, but they have a great newspaper. And so, you always hear about kids going to like Ivy League schools and going to like the best of the best journalism programs, Northwestern, Michigan, Ohio University. And I think I was like behind the 8 ball for both of those things. But again, it goes to show you that you don't have to necessarily do those things. You might have to work a little bit harder, but it's possible. But so basically what happened with me was I had an advisor at Ohio State who had great advice. And she said, Melissa, you're not going to get the dream job out of school. So you might as well go to a place that you think is really cool to live. And I took her up on that. And I graduated right before 9/11. And 9/11 happened and it was really hard to get a job. So I went home for probably like almost 8 months and worked at a bar. I was a bartender for a little bit. And I just sent out resumes every day, sent out 3, 4, 5 resumes a day. And I was sending them to like exotic locales. And I ended up getting a job at the Steamboat Springs Pilot and Today in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And they gave us a ski pass as part of our compensation package. So I would ski during the day and put out the paper at night. And it was the coolest job ever. And it was actually a really great newspaper. And so that started me off on that path. And then I went to the Colorado Springs Gazette from there. And then I went to the Baltimore Sun. And then from there to the New York Times. So I guess
And
I would say one thing too is like a lot of the students that are graduating that are coming to us for fellowships, they have these superstar internships. I think maybe in my day, we don't, it's just a little different because I think my internships were sort of my first jobs. We did more in our first jobs where now we're seeing kids almost coming straight out of school and coming to places like the LA Times or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal through fellowship programs or internship programs.
that's a really good point, that it's just the pathway to get to there. It maybe is a little bit different than your experience. Would you say, you mentioned having your advisor at the Lantern. Did that person play a role in helping you in terms of being a reference? Was that helpful at all? Or do you have any thoughts about the relationships and the importance of that when students are working, for example, if they're working at their undergraduate newspaper or something like that? Do you think those are important relationships?
I mean, she's my Facebook friend. We still chat from time to time. We just had a big Lantern reunion and it was for all the classes and she wasn't there, but like I got to see a lot of the people that I worked at the newspaper with, which was really cool. And, I keep in touch with her. I think her biggest piece of advice was that. I mean, that set me on my path to Colorado. And then, I had references from internships and just people I had met through that helped me kind of along the way. And then each job that you're at, you kind of find a mentor and, at every stop, I think I had at least one, who sort of coached me throughout my career.
So I'm jumping ahead a little bit to a question I was going to ask later, but it's along the lines of this, is if you yourself are looking for an intern in your department or your area, what are the things that you'd be looking for if you have these applicants coming from all these different places who have what appears to be a good amount of experience? That, how do you differentiate between them in deciding who might be a good employee or intern, I guess, at the times for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously resumes are like what we see first. So it's easy to kind of judge just from a resume, but I hate doing that. And also like the people that tend to get surfaced the most are, the top journalism schools, the ones who have the shiny internships. But I think we have really made a decision to sort of try to look beyond just resumes and start interviewing and looking for things that are a tell that like this person hustles. This person has kind of a unique career path, and how did that happen? And that doesn't just fall on someone's lap. Like they
Right.
have to be able to guide their career. And so if you see something like that, like for instance, we have a fellow coming in who didn't she worked at small newspapers, but she was doing like really good investigative type journalism at such a young age. And she just, she there's some green, a little bit of greenness with her, but like you could just tell like there's like a star in there. And the fact that she was be able to find like big national type stories on such a small beat, that was something that stood out to us. And she got one of the fellowships here. So I just think it's kind of like what you make of it. And also I would just say like in terms of what you can do right away, I do believe in not picking a major right away. But once you figure out what you want to do, and let's say it is journalism, like getting to work on that right away, take the relevant coursework, start lining up internships, find a school newspaper or the school broadcast station or the radio station, and just start like nothing really beats hands-on experience. And so the more that you can get of that, even when you're still in school, I think is so key.
And students, when they come, so if someone's coming and applying for one of these fellowships, I assume they have some kind of maybe a digital portfolio. How are you reviewing the work that they've done?
Yeah, so most of ours are still pretty writing based. We
Hmm.
do have an editing fellowship as well. That's separate, but our biggest program is the reporting fellowship. And obviously, like journalism has just changed completely. It's more digital focused. There's
Right.
more visuals. We have a whole video department. We have a documentary department. We have an audio department. It's totally different than when I started here 16 years ago. But if we generally look for people who can really write, who have strong story ideas and strong clips. So they basically send us their story clips in addition to their
Mm.
resume. And we just look for some like what's special in those clips. And again, like we don't try to just pick someone because their school is the best. Like we read those clips closely and look at their body of work.
Can you think, I'm putting you on the spot with this because I didn't warn you of this question, but can you think of any schools that have where you've had students come from that people would be surprised?
We've had two back to back from Marquette. And Marquette's a pretty small school, and I never knew they had a journal. I mean,
Yeah.
assume they probably had a journalism program, but it's not like the best in the nation. And we have a fellow here now and then an incoming fellow, both from Marquette, and they overlapped a little bit. Um, but yeah, and I really liked that about her. And when we picked the fellow that's here now, and I think that the coolest thing about her and what drew me to her when I was interviewing was that you could just tell she really hustled. She just had these really quirky story ideas. She was someone who was just really curious. And I think like in journalism, you need that. You need to like you just need to ask a lot of questions. You need to be curious. You could see something like, um, she had this one story idea where she worked at the Baltimore Sun where I used to work. And if anybody who's seen The Wire, there's some bad parts of Baltimore. And that she was covering the police beat and doing a lot of like homicides. And she decided one day she was just going to actually go to the funeral of one of the people who was killed that she was covering. And at that funeral, she noticed that there was these really like intricate programs that were like hand drawn by like an artist. And she started to ask questions about that program. And then she realized that like there's an artist, like a local artist who actually does this work and makes programs for funerals because there's so many homicides, but also because they wanted to give back to their community and make it like put a face to the death. And she wrote this beautiful story about it, and it was in her clips. And so that stood out to me because I was like, you know what? She doesn't have the fanciest background, but like she knows to ask the right questions, and she's observant and curious. And like she came up with that story on her own and then went back to her editor. So I think that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. And it doesn't matter where you go to school.
I love that. Coming from you, it means more than coming from me, you know, in terms of like that kind of advice. Is there anything, if you have someone applying for one of those fellowships, would there be anything that would be like a red flag or a dismiss, like, no, we don't, like you are not a good fit for what we're looking for immediately?
I mean, you know, sometimes we have people who have fancy clips, but you could kind of just tell when you speak to them that they feel like they're owed something or that they think they're the best. And what we really want is people who still have a lot to learn and that recognize that. Because we want to teach them. I mean, I'm still learning every single day. Working on the live team, I cover breaking news. So anything that is big enough that we warrant, it goes live. And all that means is like real-time updates on a big breaking news development. So if we were live tonight on the debt deal, we would be having all our congressional reporters feeding this live blog, and we would be giving our readers updates in real time. And so basically, like, the coolest part about my job now, since I've left sports, is that on one day I'm on the debt deal. Yesterday I was on the DeSantis announcement and the Twitter debacle. And you know, the day before that, a couple days before that, I was covering the Preakness Stakes horse race in Baltimore. So it's like, you know, you never know what you're going to be on. And that's so fun to me. It's like going back to those college days when we were in the newsroom and we were all just kind of working as a team and the adrenaline was pumping. That's kind of what I get daily on my breaking news team.
So you mentioned the Preakness Stakes. Why horse racing? Was that something that was like given to you, or did you choose it? Tell us why.
Well, so that's also a good part of my career path, I guess. So to back up, my uncle married into a family that owned and bred horses, and they lived near Cincinnati, and they had a couple of really good horses that ran in some big races, and I got to be in the winner's circle with them. And the first moment I was in the winner's circle, I was like, this is so cool. And so I sort of just started to follow the sport, not crazy like that they did, but like, you know, the big stuff, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, the Belmont Stakes. And then just because of my career path, I ended up at the Baltimore Sun. And not because I wanted to cover horse racing, just it happened that way. But when I got there and they knew that I was into horse racing, they were like, great, you could help with our Preakness coverage. So I started doing that. And then through that, I met the reporter at the New York Times. And then I got hired at the Times, again, completely independent of horse racing. I just got hired as a sports copy editor. But as soon as I came to the Times, he said, great, you're going to be helping me with horse racing coverage. And from there, we started kind of working the beat together. And it's not a full-time thing for me. It's kind of a side gig, but it's the funnest thing about my job. And I've really been able to kind of own that beat and really kind of establish myself as a horse racing reporter, which has been really cool. And it's fun to have a beat and to really learn something so inside and out, you know.
I think it's so cool and so unique. And how many times have you been to the Kentucky Derby?
Oh, so we were just counting. I bring my mom with me a lot, which is fun. Our very first one was I'll Have Another, which was like 2009. And I've made every single Derby since 2009, except for the one during the pandemic, because they moved it to September and nobody was vaccinated. And my colleague took one for the team because I had a little boy and I didn't want to get him sick. So yeah, so I missed one.
Oh, well, you're allowed to miss the one.
But it's a great event, and it's just like it's just really neat to cover. And there's so many, talk about storytelling, there's so many stories to tell within horse racing.
Well, I think that's a good, you know, when people think of horse racing, it's not just about the outcome of the race, right? There's so many stories within just everything leading up to it, how, I mean, I've read a lot of the coverage of, I've read a lot of your coverage over the years. And it is, I think when you talk about that curiosity that student had, that was interesting, with the drawing, the person doing the drawings like that, I could see that in so many different areas, that a story isn't just something that's obvious. I feel like there's so many things that if someone's creative and curious, like you mentioned, there's a story somewhere probably. And horse racing, obviously, more than just the outcome of the race, right? So we had a question which I'll mention. If anybody else has questions, please throw them in the Q&A. One of the questions that came in through the Q&A, and I was curious about this too, is really the impact of things like ChatGPT and AI on your profession. And how do, there's people saying, oh, in a few years, journalism majors will be out the window. It will be totally unnecessary. What do you think? And what does your profession think? The people that you're surrounded with every day, what's the conversation there about it?
Yeah, I think we're really aggressively reporting on AI right now, and we're all just sort of figuring it out. There is talk about, Google starting to rely heavily on AI, and Google and search traffic is a huge part of our audience and how we bring new subscribers to the Times. So I would say we are worried about it in a way. But I do think, like, if you do read our journalism, you see how nuanced it is, how we have people all over the world. We've been covering the Ukraine war live since the day it began, almost 7 days a week. For the first 6 months, it was 7 days a week, and now we don't really do the weekends unless there's major news. But it's pretty incredible. And in fact, our international team and with contributions from the live team just won the Pulitzer for that coverage. And that is never going to be replaced. We have people all over the world doing great journalism, and the best of the best, like the best writers, the best editors. And I mean, I could see some of these, what time is the Kentucky Derby? What time does the race go off? I could see that
Sure.
sort of thing being done by AI, but just not that nuanced, really great read about, the people that are working in the barn area behind the scenes that are producing these Triple Crown winners. You're not going to get that from AI. So I guess we're a little worried about it, but we're not. I don't think we're that worried about it.
So students who are considering a path in journalism should continue on. They should, feel like they can do that. Would you give any advice?
Well, I'm more worried, honestly, about local journalism, and, the paper that we grew up with, the Plain Dealer, is a shell of itself. And a lot of the smaller local papers, those going away, that as an organization, we fear that, because that's speaking truth to power and checks and balances in daily life, and investigations that these papers used to do that would expose all of this wrongdoing. Like, if that's not going on, then are people just getting away with things, governments and other organizations? So I think as an organization, we've been trying to commit to journalism. We have local journalism. We have a new program we started with our former executive editor to invest in local journalism. And so I do think we are trying to do our part to keep the entire ecosystem of journalism going. And I do think it is still a career path. I mean, there's so much to do. And honestly, like, I think the skills that you learn in journalism can be applied anywhere. It could be applied in public relations. It could be applied in the corporate world. If you can write, if you can think, think about going through the editing process. We have to do that on a daily basis, no matter what we're doing. And to work with a really great editor is a valuable tool. So I do think, like, you can do different things in journalism, communications. I have a lot of friends who have left the industry because it hasn't been great, in the past years. And they're having great careers, and I find that journalism skills are easily transferable in the workplace.
That's really good advice. I think that's, and like I mentioned before, I think for myself, I was an undergrad communication and sociology double major, and then went on to the PR and journalism program at Kent State. And I had already begun working in higher education at that time, so I knew that I wanted to work in this kind of space and work with students. So I knew I wasn't going into specifically journalism or anything like that. But I will say, in terms of writing, my writing skills are, I think, I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like I learned so much also, just even things like you mentioned, just the fact checking, reading things. I'm a different consumer of news because of my background in the program that I went through. I look at things differently. I had the opportunity to live abroad for a while, and I even just my consumption of news internationally and globally is also, I think, was impacted by my experience going through a journalism program, because I was looking at it with a different lens in a lot of ways, in a good way. But I definitely, to your point, I think the skills that you learn in a journalism program, also things like timeliness, organization, I mean, like all those, also just, that kind of daily skills that you learn when you go through those programs, I think is great. I know we're getting close to the end here. I just wanted to just ask a couple final questions. I feel like Guy Raz interviewing someone on how I built this. Tell me, if you had to look back on your journey to where you are now, what is something that you would say you did right that got you to what you're doing now? What was the right thing that you did?
I would say just hustling. You know, like a lot of people always say, like, I don't know how you do it, because especially now adding a 4-year-old into the mix.
Yeah.
And I should say that you have 3 kids, but like I just constantly, I never just sat in the box of my job. So, I was hired as a copy editor, which is essentially you're just kind of reading copy, you're making light edits, style, punctuation, grammar, like all of those things. And I always saw that I always propelled myself to do more. I liked what I was doing, but I knew that I wanted to be an assigning editor someday. So I kind of pushed myself to get opportunities to do the assigning part of the job. And then I got some reporters working under me. And then I pushed myself to do the best that I could doing that. And I actually got to run our N.F.L and colleges reporters, which was really cool. And I got to cover multiple Super Bowls. And just, I always felt like I was learning, and I was never done with the process. Like I said, even today, I feel like I'm learning every day. And being at a place like the Times, there's just so many people here who are so smart and interesting. And I just feel like I could learn every single day. So I would definitely say hustling and never just settling for what you are at that moment. Aim for something higher, where you want to be, and start working towards that goal. So if you want to also do reporting, which I always was kind of an editor who liked to write, I always asked for opportunities to write, and I would pitch stories. And, you might get turned down 5 times, but the 6th time you get, something greenlit and you get to write this story. And then once you start writing, the more you're writing, the better you are. And then you just start developing those skills. So I'm always pushing myself. I'm always looking for something new to do, and, not necessarily leaving my team, but doing it in addition to the daily work that I'm doing.
Is there anything that you haven't covered that you'd love to cover?
Um, being on the live team, I get to cover a whole lot, and it's really exciting. So I'm in a position now where I'm almost I'm almost embarrassed with riches of getting to cover everything. I'm working with every single department in the newsroom. I would say what intrigues me right now is sort of the new frontier of journalism, in which the students are going to be experiencing when they get out of school, which is sort of we're expanding our audio offering. We have the daily podcast, which is hugely popular, and so we're basically now developing new podcasts. We have a whole documentary wing, which I think is fascinating. I would love to do something like that. We have a newsletter operation, which is relatively new. So I would like to do some of those things that aren't the traditional, writing stories and editing stories. And in some respects, live is that. I mean, I helped create the team, and it's a new form of journalism and a new way to cover breaking news. And So that's been really rewarding. But from here, I'd like to try something completely different, because I think just acquiring different skill sets, like you never know where it's going to take you. And
Mhm.
sometimes it takes you in weird places, but like really fun places. And so it's better just to like kind of keep pushing.
There's another question about, you mentioned earlier that a lot of journalists have left the profession. What I guess this is actually maybe a good question that can be maybe our ending point is, what kinds of advice would you give to students who are considering a profession in journalism? And are there downsides to the profession that you'd want to give a warning, or maybe hey, just something to keep on your mind? So what advice do you give if we've got 16, 17-year-olds watching this? What would you say to them?
I don't want to turn them off completely. So I don't know if I should be super honest. Like pay is not, if you want to get rich, don't become a journalist. But I think that the pluses far outweigh the minuses. And I think like what a life, I just got back from Baltimore. 2 weeks before that, I was in Kentucky covering the Kentucky Derby. And that's just me who does this part-time. Think about what the reporters get to do here full-time. They drop everything at a moment's notice and fly to a war zone, or the site of a hurricane, or California, to write about climate change. And it's just a cool profession. And it's like you get to learn about the world. When I was on the copy desk and just reading stories every day, I knew so much about sports. I mean, I felt like I could just rattle off facts and stuff. So it's like you could like learn about the world by sitting at your desk. And also your colleagues around you are just amazing too. And so it's a really fun profession. But again, I think the biggest thing that I would sell young people on is that it's the skills are really valuable no matter where you work. Just the basis of just having writing skills, having editing skills, having knowing how to communicate, how to ask the right questions, how to be curious about your surroundings, we do a lot of, I mean, in my job now, I'm managing a huge team. It's a lot of organizational skills. It's a lot of
Mhm.
project management, and all of those things are valuable in the workplace, no matter not in journalism. Yes, it is true that the local papers are suffering a bit, and newspapers aren't what they were. Um, but the digital landscape is still pretty robust, and there's new entities popping up all the time. I mean, The Athletic was a new sports journalism site that was created, and the Times actually bought it, and we own the Athletic now and have a huge subscriber base in terms of like sports journalism. So there's new entities being thought up every time. I think the industry, it's not done yet. I think it's kind of in a period where we're kind of recreating ourselves. And the Times is doing great and going strong, and it's really a pleasure to work here.
And I think one of the things that is important to note is, and we see this on our side working with students and looking at opportunities at different colleges and universities for them, is that the programs are really evolving too, in terms of the content of coursework, electives. All of that is very different, even from when we went to school. I look at, even just the offerings, undergrad and graduate school for me at Kent, totally different than when I was there. And I mean, it's going to date me, but I mean, I remember when they added like the social media part to our curriculum in the journalism program. It was like, wow, what's this new thing? But it's so much is changing. And I feel like students entering the universities know what's coming. I think they pay attention probably to trends in the industry, so they can prepare students to be ready for those things when they get into the real work life. I just want to end, Melissa, by saying you gave so many amazing sound bites, actually, because a couple of things that you said right there at the end, just like, wow, what a life. Like that is a quote. Like I love that because it's true. And learning about the world by sitting at a desk. Like there's so many things that I think you make a very strong case for why this profession, you may not end up being, the richest person in the land. However, you'll have an abundance of riches and experience. I feel like, like you said, there's nothing that can replace that. Money can't replace that. And so I feel like that's in itself a really big selling point for doing the kind of work that you and your colleagues do at the time. So I'm so appreciative that you took the time, especially during like what could have been an incredibly chaotic moment. I'm so thankful for you and the work that you do, and it really makes my heart like warm to see a friend who's done really, like you said, you've used the word hustle several times, and I think you'd agree that's how we were taught growing up where we did, it's like you hustle, you do what you have to do. But thank you for doing this, super helpful. And for students that are watching, I hope you take Melissa's advice to heart and, put in the time, put in the effort, and, find what drives your passion and joy. And there's so many different branches within, and we only really just touched on, print journalism and digital journalism, but there's obviously broadcasts in other areas as well. Maybe we'll have a broadcast journalist join us one time. But thank you for taking the time, Melissa. It was great to see you. And hopefully you can now relax a little bit till the next breaking story. So
oh yeah, I'm sure there'll be one tomorrow or maybe even before I wake up. So yeah,
I think
there's
you're
never
right.
a dull moment, but that's the fun part.
I think you're right. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining and watching, and have a great rest of your week. Take care. Bye.